everyone. I'm Sarah Parsons, editor of cosmeticsbusiness.com. Thank you very much for joining us today on our discussion all about the microbiome. As I'm sure you all know, hence why you're in the room, it's one of the hottest topics in skincare, I think, right now, and generally getting more discussion among both consumer and business press. So I thought it'd be wonderful to have a discussion about that. Could you just ask you to introduce each of yourselves? Would be the easiest thing to do. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So hello, welcome everyone. My name is Christine Neumann. I am the co-founder and CEO of My Microbiome, which is on one hand an information platform about the microbiome for everyone to get knowledge about what it is. And also we are certifying products, cosmetic products and ingredients to be microbiome friendly. We do that since 2018, and so far we have tested and certified over 300 products from over 70 brands.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fanny.
Hello, my name is Fanny Kost. I'm the founder of Microbiome. It's a London-based consultancy specialized in the development of sustainable cosmetic products and sustainable ingredients, and also microbiome-friendly ingredients. Also the founder of Kinko. It's a personal care brand that balances the microbiome for better health.
Barbara.
I'm Barbara Paldis. I'm originally from the biotechnology industry, and I'm now the CEO of Codex Beauty Labs, and we've worked closely with My Microbiome certification. We believe a healthy microbiome is critical for healthy skin, and it's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us, all of you. I guess just so everyone's on a level playing field, what is the microbiome for anyone who's in the room? Kristen?
Yes, so the microbiome, quickly said, is the genetic content actually of all microbes that live in and on us, including viruses, fungi, and bacteria. Bacteria make the major part, and then viruses, and then fungi, and then viruses. And they're working very close with us in synergy, and we have very different landscapes actually on our body. So every area of our body has different conditions, pHs, I guess temperature, sebum content. Gut is different from the skin and the lung, and everywhere where you can find the microbes, and respective of the environment the microbes find, different microbes grow on the different environments. So you always have to consider when looking at products and how they interact with the microbiome, you need to know where on the body it is being applied. Maybe you want something, add something.
Yeah, really have to consider us as a planet with different climates. You have very dry zones, so in comparison to like a desert, you have very moist areas. But you also have to consider that the microbiome is not just on top of the skin. It goes in different layers. We know that they actually have a microbiome in the dermis, not just the epidermis. Even in fat tissues and other parts of the body that we didn't suspect. So it's looking not just at what's on top of the skin, but also what's inside the skin when you look at the microbiome.
And it's also a system that is very flexible and very adaptable. The microbiome will change with age. It will change with environment of, for example, climate, humidity, temperature where you're living in. It depends on the amount of sebum production and the hydration of your skin, and your gut and they're also interrelated. So your gut microbiome communicates actually with your immune system, as does the skin microbiome. So you can't look at them as a separate entity. And I would just add, there's trillions and trillions of bacteria. In the gut, I think, Kristen, is it right, is about 8 pounds of gut microbiota are part of our body or something?
No, I think it's a little bit less. So that was, I think, older numbers. So now it's 200 grams, 200 to 300 grams, something like that. But also, as you said, the interaction is really key. So it's there's a strong interaction between the microbiomes on our body, but also between the microbiomes and our body. So it's really very a complex matter, and it's not easy to understand at all. So we know it's there and it is important for our health, but we really need to learn a lot more in order to understand the real mechanisms everywhere on every corner of our body. And that's, I think, a lot ahead of us to learn, and for the scientists in the whole world.
Absolutely. And in terms of the skin and the condition of the skin, how important is the microbiome? How can the skin react if the microbiome's not in its 100% condition? Like, what advice do you have there?
Yeah, so the microbiome is crucial for healthy skin, but so is the healthy skin for the healthy microbiome. So I think it starts with, in most cases, with the skin. If the skin has an issue, there's something wrong on the skin, then it reflects on the microbiota, and they also go into imbalance and then add up to the problem. But you can also do it vice versa by when disrupting the microbiome from the outside by using too many harsh products or medication or whatever is in the environment, sun exposure or whatever. And then this can also reflect on the skin again. So if the microbiome is out of balance, then you can have skin issues on top of that.
What kind of skin issues would you typically see?
Like, the most dominant skin issues we know are eczema or psoriasis, acne, dandruffs, dry skin, sensitive skin. Yeah.
And is that, just to make it super clear, and that's also the gut microbiome as well as the skin if your gut microbiome is all over the place, that will reflect on your skin? Yeah. Wow.
So there's literature linking, for example, the leaky gut and IBS with atopic dermatitis. And there's more and more linkages that people are finding in the literature between dysbiosis, which is this imbalance in the gut microbiome, and surface skin issues.
Okay, wow. And obviously we're at a cosmetics event. So from a cosmetics point of view, as Codex, like, what kind of things do you have to take into consideration when developing products?
So the first thing is obviously to pass preservative efficacy testing. So we developed our own preservative system. We wanted it to be microbiome friendly. What was interesting is as we were looking at different ratios of, for example, lactobacillus ferment. So it's based on lactobacillus ferment. Lactobacillus is a natural inhabitant of your microbiome. The level of concentration of that ferment can become hostile to the microbiome. And this was actually research that we did with Kristen. So there are certain threshold levels below which it's fairly benign, but above which it can be completely toxic to the microbiome. And then we obviously, once we pass preservative efficacy testing, because that's a safety concern for the product, we actually go to my microbiome for certification. That's the next step before we ever start clinical trials. And so I'll hand it over to Kristen about her testing and what you test and how you test it.
Yes, so what was the question?
Would you like to go into more detail about how you test?
So what we test, and because as I said, the microbiome is so complex, is we kind of keep it simple, and we take the microbes that we know that are most dominant on our skin, and we differentiate between the different skin sites on our body. So it depends where the product is applied, and then we take a set of microbes that are respective for the respective body area, and then we test in different settings. So we have a broad range of tests in liquid culture, co-culture, single cells, single strains, and then we tested in different settings the product in combination with the microbes, and always have a control running along, and then we compare always the control to what is happening with the product, and ideally with the product we don't see a difference to the control, and if that is the case in all the tests overall, then the product gets the microbiome friendly certification seal. And that's, if you think of it, I'm coming from the testing for antimicrobial activity, and that's the usual way you do test if you want to see if a product is having an antimicrobial activity, but we just turn it the other way around and want to see that there's no activity actually. And if you see in vitro in the laboratory that there's nothing interfering with the microbes, then you can be sure that on the skin there's also nothing there that is happening. And that is kind of the first step, and then if you can be really sure that there's no interaction and no interference.
Absolutely.
So then we have 2 to 3 months of pins and needles while we wait for the data, and oftentimes we've had to reformulate. So I just want the audience to know that, for example, when we were developing soaps, there were a couple soaps where it took us 3 to 4 iterations before we actually got the formulation to where we could pass the test.
Fanny, when you're dealing in terms of as a consultant, what are some of the key challenges you've seen that your clients face?
So, what different areas? So on the formulation side, I think people have, they think that the main issues would be preservatives might not always be preservatives, because these are usual suspects. You get antimicrobials, obviously they're going to have an antimicrobial effect. But they use in very tiny quantities. So other ingredients that use in much larger quantities have much bigger impact because of the concentration in the products. For example, detergents, you have a lot of issues with some of the emulsifiers. And often people don't realize that the skin microbiome is very resilient. So actually everything will impact the skin microbiome, even water. But it will go back to neutral state most of the time if it's not insulted too much. And if you're, for example, if you have make a formulation that might be a bit aggressive with your skin microbiome, but it's not a living product, it's a wash product, might not have the same impact. That's something that you repeatedly put on your skin, but that's very substantive to your skin. So you have to take all this into consideration. Not just look at the ingredient itself, you have to look also the way you use it, how deep it's going to go. And then the other area where I've got a lot of challenges from clients is really to substantiate claims. And that's why we need standards like my microbiome, or it's very difficult. As you say, it's such a very complex. Everybody has a really unique microbiome. The interaction with the skin are not fully understood. We don't even know yet all what we have on our skins. A lot of microbes are not characterized. There's a lot of microbiome is the genetic material, but a lot of that genetic material we don't know what it's coding for. So what kind of metabolite is producing. So there's a lot to learn. And when you want to make claims, it's difficult really to substantiate and not to have any issues with authorities. We can see a lot of at the moment there's a lot of class actions against some major brands because of claims that are being made that are a bit I guess gone a bit too far when it comes to microbiome. So that's really for us in this industry. It's how and then the third part is how you translate that to the consumers. So for marketeers, it's how you're going to make a claim about microbiome for the consumer. What's the benefit for the consumer? Does it really matter, actually? At the end of the day, they want an anti-aging product. If it plays with the microbiome, is it really an issue or not? So it's all these different areas too.
But is it important to share that knowledge with the consumer about being microbiome friendly? Is that important?
Yeah, I think the education. I think there was a before and after. It's it's like discovering that the Earth is not flat. It's just we didn't know until fairly recently that there was a microbiome. Or the industry knew, but not the size of it. And it was you can't talk about barrier function without talking about the skin microbiome. It goes hand in hand. So now that we know, we have to take care of it and take that into account. And with the growing numbers of people with eczema and skin condition in our modern society, it's really something to consider.
How do you share your knowledge about and your microbiome friendliness? Obviously you have the certification, but how do you engage consumers in the conversation about the microbiome?
So we're very careful about what claims we make. To Fanny's point, we don't want to overstep. So we don't want to say anything more than it's microbiome friendly per the certification. Go check the certification out. The challenge, I would say, in formulating effective products is for the product to actually be effective and yet be microbiome friendly. There's definitely a trade-off. As Fanny said, there's many ingredients that can be at much higher concentrations. If you're looking at, actives like niacinamides or retinols or tretinoins, those can be very harmful to the microbiome in high quantities, and yet you need a certain quantity for effectiveness. So we've actually gone back to plant biology, and we're looking at plant-based equivalents manufactured with biotechnology, but then we have to test everything. So it's a long and lengthy process, much of which can't really be explained to the consumer. So we kind of try to keep it simple and say, look, it's microbiome friendly, so almost like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And then we talk about the clinical functionality of the product, because we deal with a lot of skin conditions. So we're focused on eczema products, acne products, psoriasis products. We work with the National Eczema Association, the National Psoriasis Foundation. They look at, for example, all the HRIPT studies. So we have to do up to 200 people, every phototype, people with sensitive skin, and you can't be past a certain level, and the microbiome definitely contributes to that. There aren't that many products that make it through the seal of acceptance, and I would say the microbiome certainly is a big contributor. And as Fanny mentioned, skin barrier, you can't talk about skin barrier repair, which is associated with a lot of these diseases, without the microbiome.
You mentioned about ingredients, and I wanted to ask you about ingredients. So how about pre, and postbiotics? How do you make sense to them in modulating the microbiome?
Yes, so these are like really trendy ingredients concerning the microbiome, and first of all, they make the consumer think it's something that is good for the microbiome, but most, like the majority, I would say, aren't scientifically validated, and a lot of them, or most of them, are taken from what we know from the gut, and the gut environment and the gut microbiota are very much different from what we see on the skin, and so you cannot say it's having the same action on the skin. Then I think there's a lot of pre, and postbiotics that have a good effect on the skin barrier. And some of the brands that are selling those, that they have good data. So there's maybe a handful of them that really show good data, and I think there's a lot of potential also for those postbiotics, but we need a lot of good data to prove that. There's one company out there that has actually having a probiotic from the skin microbiota, so that makes sense to use those. But and it has shown some efficacy also on the microbiota, but everything else I've seen, it's not really having an effect on the microbiome, but rather on the skin. So also here one has to be really careful of the claiming and how to navigate around that. It's not wrong to use those ingredients, but they probably don't make anything to the microbiome, but rather on the skin, and some of them really are helpful, because if you think like earlier on, we put yogurt in our faces, and somehow it has an effect and it's good for our skin, but it's not necessarily on the microbiome. And what else? Yeah, so I think it's really necessary to have good data, and the brands have to show them, and I think that's also something the customer is looking for. It's really important.
It's a big problem, because a lot of more than 95% of products claiming to contain probiotics do not contain probiotics.
Oh wow!
So a probiotic is a live organism that confers a benefit to the host, and it has to be in sufficient quantities. Most of the products nowadays that claim to contain probiotics contain probiotic fractions, or what we refer as postbiotics, or in some cases they actually contain probiotics but have been tenderized, so they're dead, but they keep their shape, and the microbiome can recognize them. The other issue with probiotics, it's a lot of probiotics used, except from the company you're mentioning, are from the gut microbiome. So we find them on the skin, but in very low quantities. They don't have any. They can have an effect, but these are most of them are lactobacilli. These. Why lactobacilli? First, because they come, they've been widely used for the gut, but they're bit more stable in cosmetic formulation, but they don't have a long-term effect on the skin. They only can be at best transient. It doesn't mean they don't have an interest in the cosmetic industry. They can produce some interesting metabolites, good postbiotics like the one you're using, and have some really proven benefits for the skin. It's just they shouldn't be labeled as probiotics.
Okay.
That's the issue. And you can see there's actually an interesting article in Allure magazine. It's last year in November, that they say probiotic skincare is a lie. And it was a very provocative title, but there was a point to it. And in following that, it's a lot of lawsuits in the US about these claims about probiotics. Clinic as an ongoing lawsuit for the claim for this redness relief range. You had Tula that had a big class action suit also. And they settled it for $5 million. So I think consumers are a bit, you have not. It's wrong to say it's probiotic. But the legislation, the FDA won't do anything about it for the time being. So.
I know we've just gone straight into talking about pre, post, and bio, but just can you explain the differences, like in the three biotics?
So. Prebiotic is basically food for your microbiome. It's something that helps your microorganism to grow. The probiotic is the live microorganism, and the postbiotic, it's anything that's derived from those microorganisms. So it could be a whole microorganism but dead. So we call them sometimes para-probiotics or ghost probiotics. It could be some fractions, some could be actually some organelles that are fully intact, or just molecules that are produced by fermentation from this microorganism. And that's been used in the cosmetic industry for a very long time. It's just that we didn't communicate about it.
Okay. And so in terms of what tools are available for in regard to marrying up the microbiome and cosmetics, what is available, Kristen?
Yes, so besides what we just talked about, and what in my eyes makes more sense is something like that is directly targeting selectively the microbes that you want to erase. For example, in case of eczema, you would like to erase Staph aureus, and for that, either I think phages or endolysins are great tools. Phages are viruses that are only attacking bacteria. And endolysins are enzymes deriving from those phages that are selectively attacking the cell wall of bacteria and killing them by disrupting the cell wall so they would explode like that. And you can engineer them in a way that they are really selective towards a microbe that you really want to address. And then the key is that you leave the rest alone. And that would be the ideal case for everything that is now used against microbes. For acne, for example, but also eczema, where the antimicrobial components are being used that are not selective. And by that, you not only kill the one that is disturbing the skin or leading to inflammation, but you also remove everything else that is there, and then you have the real problem.
Barbara, is there anything you wanted to add on that? So, from your perspective?
I think autophages, there's a couple companies now working with autophages. I think the adoption in the industry and the terminology is not as broad, maybe as the microbiome in general, but I think there's definitely a future for autophages in skincare.
Can I add something? So the interesting thing about bacteriophages, it's actually GRAS approved in the US because it's been used, and people don't know about it, consumers, but that's the normal way of sanitizing in the US in the food industry. So if you eat food in the US, you're probably eating a lot of phages, you don't know about it, but it's so selective when it comes to the microorganisms they target with phages, but there's no risk for any other cells. So obviously, talking about viruses to consumers, it's a bit tricky these days after COVID. So it's, but phages to me, it's one step forward compared to using some probiotics because it's not live and it's much more stable in products. So you see more and more cosmetic ingredient company developing some ingredients based on phages and more brands. And because it can be so targeted, you can really go to only the strains that causing some issues. And compare, to a live cell that, has to you just multiply by 2 every time you divide. When you got a phage, then you're producing, 1,000 times virus per cell. So it's you need very little quantities to spread it out to the body.
Interesting. And we've talked a lot about claims, but what claims can you make in regards to the microbiome? What can you do in regards to that, Kristen?
So yes, the claims that make sense and that we can do at the moment is to be microbiome friendly, to not harm the microbiome, to not change it, because everything else on top of that is we just don't know. If you want to improve something, we don't know if we see a change in the microbiome, if this is something that is good or not good, because there's no microbiome, there's no unique microbiome to everyone. Everyone's microbiome is different. Yours microbiome is different from mine, is healthy for you, and mine is healthy for me. But how do you want to develop a product that changes our both microbiomes in the same way, or in a way that it is getting better? So that's the main question here, and there will probably never be a gold standard microbiome that is the goal for every product to achieve on the people. And so I think claiming to nourish, to rebalance, to improve the microbiome is always and I think there's a lot of companies that have done a lot of research there and claimed that, like Unilever, and they got a class action suit on that. So they even if you have a lot of data, it's not enough to say it's improving something. And I think that's why you really have to stay down to earth, kind of, and work with what you have and what you can do to keep it, leave it alone. And I think that's already a good thing if cosmetics are not harming the microbiome, because a lot of cosmetics still do that a lot. And we're using a lot of them, we're layering them, we're using them every day and over the time. And we don't even know that yet, because studies haven't been performed in that way for over years to see what is happening to the microbiome due to the use of cosmetics. So the goal should be every cosmetics that I'm using. So I would also recommend to use less cosmetics. And then the ones you use are microbiome friendly to make sure you're not harming your microbiome over time.
Okay. You mentioned that, I've got follow-up questions, but you mentioned that wash-off products probably is not going to have the same impact as a leave-on product. What about colour cosmetics versus skincare? Do they have different impacts on the microbiome?
Well, we have certified one range of color cosmetics, a makeup line from Annemarie Berlin, they're from Germany. We were actually surprised that we see a little bit of an impact, but we were thinking that the pigments inside would have a bigger impact than we saw in our tests. So it's possible to pass, but we were already working very close together with them before they formulated, and they were formulating them already with the microbiome in mind. So they were really already very cautious about what they were doing. And I think so we haven't tested anything further than that actually. So I can't say if other color cosmetics are more harmful, but I would guess so.
And would you think that would be more complexion products versus eyes, or it wouldn't really matter?
It depends on if it's pure pigments or if it's a dry product, or because obviously a foundation is much more like a skincare product, and more because there's a lot of claims about actives into the formulations. So it behaves like a skincare product really, but it's true that some of color cosmetics like eyeshadows or they're not meant to penetrate. So being at the surface, it won't have the same impact on the microbiome. And a lot of those minerals would be inactive for microbiome, just quite inert.
Okay.
So, but it's so complex that you really have to see every ingredient behaves a different way, and things behave differently when they're together. So you have some really a lot of complexity. You can never really predict how it's going to behave, even if you know individual ingredients, the way they behave, even together, they can have some synergies or.
Absolutely. And so I can imagine there's no golden secret to this, but how do you go about formulating microbiome-friendly cosmetics?
I would give that question to you.
Well, first you try to start with ingredients, for example, that have already been certified microbiome friendly, because there are some that you can find on the My Microbiome website. But more importantly, less is more. The fewer ingredients you have, if you're formulating with more than 20 ingredients, chances are you're putting your formulation at risk for not passing. Also, formulating at a pH that's consistent with human skin, so between 4.5 and 5.5 is important, because if you're not in that range, you're already shooting yourself in the foot with the formulation. That's why soaps are so difficult to make microbiome friendly. They're very alkaline. So with that pertains to washes and cleansers particularly. And other than that, there's still, I would say, a certain degree of trial and error, but I would just go back to less is more. Fewer ingredients, you can have lower concentrations of potent actives. You improve your odds of passing the test.
I'm not demonizing any ingredients here, but are there some that you would just rather avoid, just to try and keep that microbiome friendly status?
So I'll defer to Fanny on that, but I would say we're not a huge fan of large quantities of essential oils.
That's same. It's definitely the main. So many allergens in essential oils. People think it's natural, it's good. That's one of the main cause of allergies. So no, definitely if you want to use some fragrances, and I'm a big fan of fragrances. I started my career in fragrance business, so but it has a big impact on the skin microbiome. But you have now some companies like Givaudan that actually certified some microbiome friendly fragrances. That's available now. But essential oils are usually, and for good reasons. In nature, there's the plants, they defend themselves and they come up with all these chemicals that are very powerful. So
they're great antimicrobials.
Yeah. That's why trees can live so long, and that makes a lot of sense. But you concentrate that in essential oils and put that on your skin. It has a big impact on the microbiome. So definitely put those away.
How about you, from your perspective?
Yes, I would also say less is more. That's what we see in our testing. Also lower the concentrations, and we have done a lot of work with Codex Beauty because they went back and forth, and we still see that you can really change lower the concentration of the preservative systems, still have a safe product, but make it more microbiome friendly. And I think I would recommend, or I do recommend that to a lot of clients. We're being asked a lot from them to give tips on formulation, and I would also avoid essential oils or everything that is known to be antibacterial. Something very interesting we have seen, for example, with sunscreens. I know it's a problem in the US because they use mineral sunscreen, or they have to use mineral sunscreens, and they are very antibacterial, at least the zinc oxide. And so that is, for example, one that I would say try to avoid it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
one thing about just to add on the formulation, people forget it's just not the formulation. You can really play with your packaging. So if you have airless packaging like you're using, for example, when you can really diminish the number of concentration of preservatives. So you just not have to look at the formulation, but how you're going to package it and how you can play then modifying the formula to minimize its impact.
And also just talk to the manufacturer. You'd be amazed at how many ingredients phenoxyethanol is hidden. And so when you're looking at your 1%, you have to make sure you're adding up all the phenoxyethanol in every single ingredient in your formulation, which goes back to under 20 makes things easier.
Oh, wow. Actually, can we just expand on the packaging in regards to how it plays in regards to the microbiome? Because refillables talked about a lot, and cleaning that. And so what's your kind of interpretation of that? How do you get good packaging and that can play with the formula and the microbiome? Yeah, so Fanny.
Yeah, obviously you don't want, first of all, you don't want to contaminate your products. So it's, having something that's an airless packaging is always better if you're looking at the skin microbiome, because you can, if you have a cream and you put your fingers deep in all the time, and things might grow in it, and then you put it back on your skin. It's not the product that has a bad, an effect on your microbiome, but it's what you grow in it that's actually having a bad effect on your microbiome. So you have to consider that, and having airless packaging and filling in a sterile environment can help you to have really some formulation without containing any preservative. It's much more, obviously, more expensive to produce, but then you can really do without traditional or with very low levels of preservatives.
Yes, if you do sterile manufacturing and then sterile packaging, and with airless systems, you can even avoid preservatives completely. And there are some companies that do that, and
I would never do that. I would never ever do that. I
would
still
do
have
that?
preservative. No, because you never know if you can have some kind of small leak in the seal of your vacuum tube. Even if it's evacuated, you might get a leak in the seal of the top of the tube. So you want safety. I just want to say safety above all else, and preservatives are not bad. Just limit the quantity.
Yes, but I have to tell you, there's a company that's having these filters and airless, and they can really do without.
But do they have 3 years of stability studies?
I think so.
Pierre has a line of products for but they're pharmaceutical company, but
they are plastic still. They're not.
That's the other problem about sustainability. So it's adding more packaging, and but then you can also formulate products without any water, so you won't have any activity, and then less inclined to get contamination. So there's
or
different ways
anhydrous products with oils.
How about in terms of Codex, in your packaging? Is that something? What did you take into consideration?
So we're airless, as Fanny mentioned. We also do not work with manufacturers who don't have ISO 22716 certification, which is good manufacturing practice. What that means is it's manufactured in a clean room. They have clean room standards, so you know that the air isn't contaminated because they have filtration systems for the air. They have gloved hooded, beard hoodies, covers for their boots, and they regularly sanitize their floors. You'd be amazed at the number of cosmetic manufacturing facilities that don't qualify for ISO 22716. So it goes back to, when people ask, well, what is clean beauty? Clean beauty means contamination free. It means not dirty, starting with your manufacturing and starting with your packaging.
Yeah, so getting back to basics, I think, is probably the main thing.
Yeah, I'd be amazed actually. Because I worked in the US for the last 8 years, but I come from other markets, and I lived in Japan for a long time, and working for a contract manufacturer. The difference of when I saw contract manufacturing in the US, I was a bit shocked, when.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to see that the standards are people come from different industry, like food industry, so or other industries, and they didn't have all that good manufacturing practice in place. And it's
to give you an example, I was at a facility in Southern California. They just opened the garage doors and let in air from the outside when in their filling facility, and then they had running shoes and the floor had mud over it. So it's like, why on earth would I ever manufacture it?
And I saw mosquitoes. I lived in Houston, and they opened the doors because it was too hot, and there's mosquitoes just above the vent, so they will open that. So so it's.
My God, I feel like it's
okay,
we digress. Speaking, having about high standards, so for certifications, Kristen, can you walk us through different types of certifications in relation to the microbiome?
Yes, so there are now a few more certifications. So we have started in 2018, and now in the last year or so, I think there are more certifications popping up. It's Sequential Bio, Kind2Biome, and LabSkin, who's also here. And so there's differences. For example, so we do everything in vitro, as I said, because it's not making sense to test on the human skin, because if you see something or you see nothing, you don't know where it comes from. Either it's from the product or it's from something in the lifestyle or whatever, your diet. So I think in vivo certification doesn't make sense because it's not standardizable. Also, if you even would use the same people every time, they will have a different microbiome or different influences on the microbiome. And then Kind2Biome is, I think, doing also in vitro tests. LabSkin is doing in vitro tests, right? On 3D skin, I think. What is special about my microbiome is that we have a registered certification mark in over 32 countries, and we've done that for a long time, and our settings are really, we have a broad range of settings, and we're testing on many microbes, and I think that's kind of unique, and we have a lot of experience so far.
And in terms of raising awareness among consumers, because you have certifications in the sense of Leaping Bunny and things like that, but raising awareness of microbiome friendly certifications, what tips do you have for going about that?
Yeah, so it's actually what we started with, because that was our main goal, to create awareness about the microbiome, and that the consumer still needs to find out that there's a microbiome and that we have to take care of it. And we still work on that via our information platform. We keep posting news about the microbiome to take the scientific data and make it digestible for the broad public to understand it. And then we work very close with our clients to create awareness. They have a platform, they have a network, we have a network, and then we work together. We go to the fairs, and we try to be on webinars and just to make the people know. But it's really to go to the customer, to the final customer. It's not that easy to make them all understand what's going on. And we had a survey in Germany actually, and it was interesting to see that the older, Hedi, you have to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have the exact numbers in mind, but the older population, 60% didn't know the word microbiome at all. But it was vice versa with the younger population around the age of 20. 60% heard about the word, but then how many percent of them didn't know what it is? 30. So half of them they knew the word microbiome, but they didn't know what it means. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and we're trying to work on that, because it's, I think, a very important part of the whole industry. Absolutely. We have to all work together on that.
I guess we are accepting questions afterwards, by the way, but I guess just to wrap up this part of the discussion, what is the key thing we need to know about the microbiome going forward in the industry for each of you? Would you like to go first, Fanny?
I think we need to understand that we are more microbiome, but we are human, and that's it's hard to get the grasp of it. But you have way more cells from your microbiome, but you have human cells. And they evolve for hundreds of thousands of years. We co-evolved, so it's part of us as much our own cells. And a lot of genetic material, most of the genetic material we get is from the microbiome. And even our own DNA, we don't got it all from our ancestors. 8% of our DNA come from viruses. So so it's very hard, where us stop, as human being. The whole concept of you are you, and it's just, it stop at the top of the skin is not true. So. And educating the consumer to get that mindset, it's going to take a while to really understand, because you can't see it. It's so small. So but it's more us than it is, than the rest of ourselves, and that's a different, mindset, and it's going to take a while to get there.
Barbara?
So to add to what Fanny was saying, our skin barrier is about 10 to 20 microns thick, which includes the microbiome on top of it. So basically, what protects you from environmental aggressors and infections is about as thin as your human hair. So to give you perspective also, it's incredibly strong and resilient, and yet incredibly thin. I would say that we're only starting to scratch the surface now and really understanding the microbiome. That's largely dependent on gene sequencing technologies. So as those techniques improve and become more cost effective, we'll be able to get more and more resolution. Today, most companies looking at the microbiome use either 16S or 18S. There's new companies coming on board doing whole genome sequencing. That, of course, depends on the depth of how you're looking at the genetics. But people need to start looking at not just the species, which is what most companies are doing today, but also the strain of the various species that are in there. And it's a hot topic right now in dermatology. Obviously, the associations of the microbiome with skin diseases, very, very tightly linked together. But I would say we're only barely, literally starting to scratch the surface. And so for companies making claims, I think it's, to make a strong statement, I think unless you have an incredible amount of science behind you is insanity. Because we barely know what the microbiome is. We barely know what the correlations are. We barely know how the species change with various skin conditions. And so we're at the beginning. But a very, very exciting beginning.
Absolutely. Kristen?
Yes, so just one last word from me. So we know the microbiome is important, and I think everyone in cosmetics science and cosmetics field should be aware of it when creating new formulas. And I think our goal is that all cosmetics on the market are microbiome friendly one day. And that would be wonderful.
Yes.
First, do no harm.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions? Yes. Sorry, I think there is a microphone, or we just need it for recording. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, the gentleman over here.
Thank you.
Yes,
yeah,
it's on.
Okay. I'm Liam, the technical manager at Melbeck Microbiology. So I was thinking about how you said everyone's got a different microbiome. So does that not mean we should be looking at what they're doing rather than what's there? Because as everyone's got a different microbiome, it strikes me that potentially the way forward to show there's a difference in someone's microbiome is when you apply a product, if what they're actually doing on the skin changes rather than what's there. I don't know if you think, metabolomics, that kind of area of work, and I know it's in its early infancy, but potentially that's the way forward. What do you think about that?
Yes, you're right. So that's actually the key. That would be the ideal case, that you don't look at the microbes anymore and at the species, but one step further at the metabolites that you find there and at the functions of the microbiota. And there probably you will find more similarities again between different people than when looking at the species.
Yeah.
But that's something that has to be done with research, and we have to collect data and wait.
And that might be the way that we get actual showing differences, that the product's having an actual difference, and then it might be beneficial. So
yeah, it's actually a number of companies have started to do that, looking at proteomics and really looking at what the metabolites and doing some tests for the cosmetic industry when they're showing some interesting companies like oxyproteomics that are kind of services they offer to really look at and then you can get a baseline between different consumers, even though they don't have the same microbiome, then you still have the outcome will be the same and prove that. But it's a lot. It's very expensive.
yes.
It takes a lot of research, a lot of money. So it's
But worth it in the long run.
Yeah, it's going to take a while before we get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, yes. Sorry, I will just grab that for you. Thank you.
So I'm just asking on behalf of my colleague that just had to run next door. So she's the product development manager we work for Decree Skincare. So she just wanted to know, is it possible to formulate a microbiome friendly exfoliating product using acids? Because obviously the pH level is much lower than what you recommended.
I mean, in theory you could. Now, do you really want to do that? It's a question. So when you exfoliate, you remove all the microbiome. So it's when I get clients to ask me those questions, I always tell them, it's not really the best way forward when you want to take care of your microbiome. It's the best way forward is not to scrub off that layer, and you can actually work with renewing your skin without using harsh chemical peel or physical exfoliation. What you want to promote is you can work on the corneodesmosomes, little links between the dead skin cells, and instead of you're promoting actually the exfoliation in situ rather than doing from above the surface. That way you don't remove all the microbiome together with the dead skin cells. So yes, you can, but again, it's more, and I think that's the whole industry. We need to think of that. It's just what products do we really need? The microbiome is doing a fantastic job. I mean, it's been doing for humanity for much longer than this industry existed. But it's really makes sense of what is the minimal we can use to keep us in good condition. And I think we're overdoing it. And we arming it, and how we don't harm it. So
I agree with that. We tell our customers, especially people under 30, all you need is a decent cleanser and a hydrator, and that's basically it. You don't need 17 different products.
That's the whole concept of Decree.
Yeah.
Less is more.
Absolutely. And yeah.
Just one more. I don't need a microphone.
Oh, sorry. We need it for recording. Really, sorry. Sorry.
No one can hear you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
firstly, congratulations, because this is massively complicated and you're at the forefront of doing this. So I take my hat off to you. What's your end goal? Because if we've got a dry skin condition or something, sometimes just a slab of Vaseline over that particular bit can sort it out. It's not the microbiome is already defective on its own. So where do you see the end goal for the microbiome? What are we aiming for?
So at Codex, our goal is healthy skin. So getting rid of eczematic patches, getting rid of contact dermatitis, managing acne in a different way than just applying massive amounts of salicylic acid or benzoyl peroxide, which are not good for the microbiome either. Regulating sebum, and basically looking at more the root causes of some of these skin disorders, possibly from inside out as well. And it's honestly, it's just solving those skin conditions, because personally I believe if you have healthy skin, you shouldn't do anything to it. And that's the best thing you can do, not piling up 10,000 different layers of foundations, allowing your skin to breathe. Obviously we today live in an Instagram culture of Instagram face, where not only does everybody want to look the same, but everyone's learned contouring from Kim Kardashian. I think consumers need to ask themselves, do they really want to look like that, and why are they doing this? Because is this really in the long run? And unfortunately we have no long-term data to support this, obviously. So it may be fine, it may not be fine, but do you want to take that risk?
Yes, I think also, like you said, it's like a holistic approach. You want to be healthy in the end, and the healthy skin is part of it. And healthy skin can only be healthy if the microbiome is healthy, and vice versa. So I think that's the goal. You have to want to be healthy in, like as you said, in the whole. And also cosmetics should be, if they are used, be part of staying healthy, or if they can relieve a symptom, but it should be relieved for a long run and not only for a few days or until you stop using it.